All right, this is Stephen Sloan. The date is September 14th, 2011. I'm with Mr. Melvin Waters. We're at his home in Dallas, Texas at 8030 Frankfurt Road, apartment CT 228. Mr. Waters, thank you for sitting down with me today. This is an interview with the Texas Holocaust and Genocide Commission's Liberator project. Again, Mr. Waters, thanks for sitting down with me today. I'd love to start by finding out a little bit about your background. I know you were born in Lancaster, Texas, but if you can tell us a little bit about your early life.
Well, I'm told that we left Lancaster pretty close to my first birthday, and I think we lived in Italy, Texas for a few months, and then we came back to Lancaster. My dad tried a little farming there just about the time that farm prices and cotton prices all took a dive, and he had to come to Dallas, he and my mother, and start working, pay off their debts for their little adventure, and they left me with my grandmother in Lancaster. So that went on until my mother got pregnant by my little brother, who was 4 years younger than me. And he then lived with my mother, with my parents, in what is called Trinity Heights, part of Dallas. And after my brother was born, we sold our house, and my dad was going to transfer to Lubbock, Texas. At that time, there was just a gravel road between Dallas and Lubbock, and finally he backed out of that, leaving the family and everything. His family and my mother's family were all in Lancaster. So then I was in another part of Trinity Heights that we moved to after selling our house, and I started the grade school and then went to a place called Trinity Heights in Oak Cliff section of Dallas.
You talked about this was during the period of the Depression, of course.
Yes, I was born in 1925, and the Depression, of course, hit 1929, and it didn't hurt us as much as it did other people. My dad went to work when he had to go to work in Dallas. He went to work for Fleshman's East, and which was as a salesman, and we got through the Depression in pretty good shape. Then in 1941, I guess, right after Pearl Harbor, we'd been in 42, my father lost his job. He was always heavyset, and he came up with diabetes, and he lost quite a bit of time, and so they replaced him. Of course, protection for employees was not enforced as much then as it is now. But we had a harder time in the latter part of the Depression than we did in the worst part of the Depression. Mm-hmm. And we decided to move to Lancaster, where both of my grandparents lived at that time. And then I went to high school. I moved there just in time for me to go to high school. So I went to high school in Lancaster, Texas.
What are some memories that stand out from that time in Lancaster? What are some memories that stand out to you from your time at Lancaster there in high school?
Well, of course, I went back to Lancaster kicking and screaming and left all my friends and everything in Dallas. But looking back over it now, it's probably the best thing ever happened to me. A place like Lancaster was a bedroom community. Half the people there worked in Dallas. And it was at that time, it was a beautiful little town. It had an electric train that went all through there, that went all the way to Waco. And you could ride to Dallas nearly every hour. And it sounded like the commuters that they had on a small scale, like they had in New York. But it was a great place for a child to grow up in. You had a small community. You could roam the streets. My mother and dad never knew where I was. Contrast to today, but looking back on it now, it's probably the best thing ever happened to me. And I got to play football a little bit, and made a lot of friends in Lancaster.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the interurban. I've heard people tell stories of the interurban railway that would run back and forth.
Yes, it was a it was a electric passenger train that would have one or two cars. And funny thing, one of my great uncles was the first man to drive to Waco, and another of my great uncles drove the last one from Waco to Dallas.
Oh, wow. So were you able to take that to visit your friends in Dallas?
Oh, yes, yeah. And later, my wife, after I was married, we couldn't find a place to live in Dallas, so 4 years we lived in Lancaster, had 2 daughters while we were there. And when we had our second daughter, we just decided we had to have a house, and so we built a house in Oak Cliff. But those 4 years we was there, my wife worked part of the time, and we used the interurban to go back and forth to commute to our job in Dallas, to our jobs in Dallas.
How about how long was the commute from Lancaster to Dallas on the interurban?
It was less than an hour. It's about 45 minutes to downtown Dallas. I know one time we, as young men, we got where we could we would ride the interurban up to Dallas on a Sunday afternoon. 3 or 4 of us go to a movie, have something to. There was snack places all over Elm Street in Dallas between the movie houses, and eat and go back. And I think there was 3 of us that time, and collectively we had ridden the interurban up, and then collectively we liked a nickel, having enough money to get back, and we went all over downtown Dallas at 9 o'clock at night trying to find somebody that'd give us a nickel. We finally found a young man that we knew from Wilmer Hutchins. Wilmer Hutchins was kind of our rival in football and sports, and so we weren't real friendly, but he was nice enough to loan us a nickel.
Well, when your father lost his job, did you have to go to work to help support the family?
No. My grandfather had given me a pony when I was a year old for my first birthday. And I kept a horse for, of course, I'd trade, or he would trade horses for me or ponies for me to get me with because their life expectancy is not that long. So I had probably 3 ponies, and finally when I outgrew that, and we were in Lancaster, and he had a stables in Lancaster, so I had all the horses I wanted to ride, or I had more than I wanted to ride. He wanted me to exercise horses all the time, and so sold my pony and invested it in some cattle, and I finally had about 30 head of cattle, and that was going to be my college money, and it would have been enough probably for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe at that time tuition in Texas was $25 a semester, so it would have lasted maybe a year and a half, 2 years. But when my dad lost his job, unknown to me, he started using that fund. And so when I graduated from high school, and I went to my grandmother and said, well, I need my money now, and she said, your father has it. Well, my father we'd been living off of it for about 6 months. So there went my college fund. I went to work that summer for the county of Dallas, working on the road gang, shoveling pea gravel. Then I got on the bridge gang, and then I got promoted up to driving the gravel truck, and I was making $3.20 a day. So I saved enough that summer to go to college a year on.
Mm-hmm.
I never did make the year because of the war, but and then when I came back, I thought I had the GI Bill rights. We thought we had the GI Bill. I started to North Texas with a neighbor of mine who had been in the Air Force, and we'd been roommates at NTAC before we'd gone into service. And I found out about 2 or 3 weeks into the semester, I was notified that I did not have the GI Bill. So I had to pull out of school. I had worked for a while for Dallas Power and Light before I had gone into the service, and I went back to work for them. They said they didn't have to give me my job back because I was a temporary employee, but they would employ me, but they wanted me to advance myself, wanted me to go to night school, and I said, well, I wanted to go to night school. And so I went back to work for Dallas Power and Light 6 months on my old job, and they promoted me to a little bookkeeping job, and then about 6 months later, they put me into the general accounting.
I see.
And that started me.
Started you on your CPA career.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, before the war, when you first went to college, where did you go to college?
North Texas Agricultural College in Arlington.
Yeah, UTA now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what sort of coursework were you taking?
Well, I made a mistake. I started taking engineering because I was good at mathematics. All my teachers told me, oh, you ought to take engineering. And in engineering, 2 times 2 is not always 4. And accounting is always 4. So it makes a big difference.
That's right.
To me, or it did to me. But anyway, when I came back, I was showing you some pictures earlier, and I don't know whether you noticed the young man that was looking outside the camp and was looking up. But he was about 27 years old, from Sacramento, California, and I went overseas with him, with 89 other people. But he was. Then I got thrown back with him again about after 6 months, which will come out in the story later. I got thrown back with him. He and I were in the same ambulance there for several months, and he kind of became my big brother. And he's always said, "Melvin, you've got to be a CPA. You've got to be an accountant." And his oldest brother was, and he just idolized his oldest brother, who was a CPA in Sacramento. So when I came home and I went back to that job, they said, "Well, what are your ambitions?" I said, "I want to be a CAP." And they said, "A CAP? What's a CAP?" I finally learned it was CPA.
Well, so you're taking your engineering classes, and you're already getting a sense that that's not where you should use your skill in math, I guess.
Yes.
So were you, at that point, you said the war was already going on, were you aware of kind of keeping track what was going on with the war?
Oh, yes. I was a senior in high school when 16 years old when the war, when the world started. Remember December 6th well, and I was so upset and that I wanted to quit school and go in the Navy, because I always heard of the underage guys getting in the Navy and see the world. And my mother said, "I am not signing any papers for you until you have to go. You got to wait for the draft." And I don't think I wanted to go that bad anyway.
Yeah.
Because I did want to finish school, and my dad, even though he had never gone to college, or my mother, was always hammering into my head that when you get out of school, it's going to be necessary to have a college degree, because the way times are changing. And so I never did get my degree. I got hours stacked on top of hours, but they were always in the accounting field.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't take courses like I should have taken, like English and going to SMU. I had to take religion.
Well, you seem to enjoy learning. I haven't mentioned it, but you've got a class this morning you've got to get to later on. So.
Oh, they came up with the opportunity here that we could go to, if you're 65 years or older, you can go to college for 12 hours a year free in the state of Texas. So I took advantage of that.
That's great. Well, so you're aware of the war. You are not quite old enough yet, and so you're keeping track of the war. You said you went to college not quite a year. Can you tell about leaving college that first time?
Oh, I left college early. I left college in, I went home for Thanksgiving, never to go back. I went down to the Marine Corps recruiting office with a friend of mine I played football with. And he was going to join the Marine Corps. So I went down with him and saw him off. It was one of those deals where, I don't know where his parents were, but it was one of those deals where he went down, took a physical, and left that night. So I went down and held his hand, and they talked me into taking a physical. And so I told my parents about it, and my mother said, you're not going anywhere. I'm not going to sign papers for you. So I was home, and I was going to start the school in the second semester taking business administration. And my dad told me, he said, if you want to go into the Marine Corps, you can. And I said, Mother won't sign the papers. He said, well, let me work on that. So finally he talked to her and signed my papers, and I went up, and of course I had taken a physical along with my friend, and I went over the latter part of November, and I went up and left to go to San Diego on January the 2nd. And then when I got to San Diego and started through my physicals and stuff out there they had for us, I flunked, got sent back. I was discharged from the Marine Corps. And so I came back, and in the spring of 1943, and my next door neighbor, who I had been my roommate in TAC, had joined the Air Force under a new plan. They were taking in 17-year-olds, and when they got 18, they would call them up for cadets. And he had done that, and he was waiting to go into the Air Force. So I went up and talked to him and told him I had this medical discharge over my head. And they said, well, if you can pass our mental and you can pass our physical, and you say you can, I will get you into cadets. Mm-hmm. So I passed the mental. I went down to take the physical. I was flying high, and they hit me right in the face again. You got high blood pressure. Mm-hmm. So that kept me out of anything for over a year. And I went back to school in a different way. I got a job at the war plant out in Arlington, Grand Prairie, and they sent me back to school, night school at Arlington. So I went back a semester of school at Arlington, and when I went back to work, and all this time, the draft board in Lancaster was telling me they were going to send me up with the next group. And I was supposed to go and left in September of 1943. And they didn't call me up. So I went to the head of the draft board. Being Lancaster, you know everybody, and everybody knows you. And he said, Melvin, why don't you just give up? And I said, well, give me a chance anyway. I think I can pass the physical. I've been going to the doctors and so on and so forth. They had nothing for high blood pressure in those days. The pill for high blood pressure didn't come out until about 1960. So he more or less told me I might as well just give up. And so I had taken a job with Dallas Power and Light, a day job. I stayed in the North American Aviation there, was working 7 days a night, 7 nights of or 6 nights a week. So I got a day job, and while I was on this job with Dallas Morning Light, I read in the Dallas Morning News, I saw in the want ads, I saw for that they were looking for ambulance drivers for immediate service overseas. And so by this time, this was in spring of 1944. I had a young man who was about a year older than me that I was working with that had a similar experience with the Marine Corps and the draft board. He was a year older than me. I showed him the ad, and so we called the telephone number that afternoon and got an interview the next day with the person who had put the ad in. Fellow by the name was Stephen. Can't think of his last name right now. But anyway, he was an insurance man, had his own little insurance practice. And he said that he had been a driver for the American Field Service in the First World War. It seemed that he was studying with some other Americans, students who were studying in Paris. And when World War I broke out and Paris was under siege, they jumped in and got some taxi cabs to go out to the battlefields and pick up wounded and bring them back into a certain hospital there in Paris. So after the siege was over with, they decided they'd like to continue that service, and so they formed the American Field Service. They got their parents to buy them some ambulances, which were manufactured by the Ford Motor Company in the southern part of France. And they served with the French, giving these ambulance driving services until Americans joined the war. And he told me that his son was overseas in Italy at that time with the American Field Service. So we told him our story, and he said, "Well, you're the type of people we're recruiting now. I think both of you have a good shot of being offered a chance to go overseas." And so we put in our application, and we did. We waited around, and they had us to take shots, and finally we fooled around a couple of months. I don't think we was ever going to get. I thought the war was going to be over before we even got in. And what the problem was transportation. All the shipping was going to England, and we were to be with the field service in Italy. Mm-hmm. They had a contingency in Italy. They had one in India, Burma, and we chose to go to the one in Italy. And so finally we got called up to New York, and we just missed her. Evidently, I found out later, some guy who joined up months after we did got overseas before we did, and the reason was the shipping. While we were on our way to New York, the opening came up to send some people overseas. We weren't there. These guys lived in that area, and they were shipped over, and so we got to New York, and we got stuck in New York for a couple of months which wasn't too bad. They had a place downtown, what we call a brownstone, on 51st Street, right behind St. Patrick's Cathedral. So we stayed there a couple of months, and about 7 weeks, I think. So we was right in the middle of New York, and really it was enjoyable 7 weeks.
I bet.
And we had some ex-drivers from World War I wanted to ask us out for a weekend in Connecticut, and they treated us quite well in New York. And finally, we were called down to they had an office in the Cotton Exchange building right off Wall Street, and we were supposed to go down every other day to check in with them. And so they finally said, "Well, we got the shipping to get you overseas." And while Autry Rollins was the name of the other fellow that went with me from Dallas. We were the first in our unit to get to New York, and in the brownstone that we were staying in, there we started getting people in. Every week, 2 or 3 more would come in, and finally, when they told us that we were going to ship out the next day, and so we all got prepared, and then there was some guys we never had seen before joined us, and then when we got to Grand Central Station to catch our train, there were about twice as many guys waiting there was as many people waiting for us as we had in our brownstone. So we ended up with 90 people going overseas in our unit. And so from Grand Central, one evening we started out, and I met a young man that afternoon that we got from Alabama, and we got to talking, and Arthur Rollins, myself, did not have very much in common. We had joined up with 2 or 3 other guys there, and so we had a clique of about 5, and I got talking to a couple of other fellows and found out that I had more in common with them. He liked to play cards and some other things. So we had a card game going about midnight that night when we found out that we were in Washington, D.C. And the way they did back during the war was the Capitol was lit all the time. And so we broke up our game and went out on the platform of the train and watched as we circled around Washington, D.C. And then as we circled, we could always see the Capitol and how brightly lit it was. And it really was done that way for a symbol.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next morning when we woke up, we were in Richmond, Virginia. We had breakfast in Richmond, caught another train out to the east, and went into a camp called Camp Patrick Henry. And there was a embarkation camp. We had thousands of troops that were out there getting ready to go overseas.
Mm-hmm. Did you, any training or orientation, how much of that did you have?
Well, while we were in New York, we had some, I guess you'd say, lectures from veterans that, in fact, the 90 of us that were going back overseas, 13 of them were returnees. In other words, if you stayed overseas 2 years, you get a 30-day leave back in the States. And so these guys were on leave back in the States after serving 2 years. And they were sort of the backbone of the organization, I guess, and we would have lectures, and I wouldn't call them seminars, but we pretty well were acquainted with what we were going to do and how to do. In fact, I got paranoid right before I ever got overseas by booby traps and mines. I mean, they just drilled that into us. Don't ever pick up a souvenir. Don't watch where you step. One of our fellows, after we had a couple of months, been overseas a couple of months, stepped out of his ambulance. He was driving along a very busy highway and saw some Canadians out in a field demining the field, and they had an accident, and so he stopped to see if he could maybe transport somebody to the hospital. When he stepped out of the ambulance, he stepped on an anti-personnel mine, blew his foot off, and lost one eye. Now, I don't know the connection between those two, but anyway. So we really got paranoid I did on that. But the training, after we got overseas, took us 30 days to get there. We did get training for the 5 days that we were in this camp, but the training was how to abandon ship, how to take care of ourselves on the ship. It was all about getting over there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were on this Liberty ship, which was a tanker that they were turning out 1 or 2 of them a day out the shipyard, and they were very well. They thought if they made 2 trips, they got their money out of it. So they were very well put together, I guess you might say. I didn't know that at the time I was on one, but we got training in abandoning ship, and we learned how to use a gas mask, and we put it on, and then we learned to okay, think of what I was going to say now. But anyway, we took shots. I had a card with all the shots I had taken. I only needed 1 booster. And they put me in line, and I said, I don't need all these shots again. Oh, they won't hurt you. Before I knew it, I was going down the line. I was being shot from left and right. And all the shots over again. And had unnecessarily had a couple of sore arms for a couple of days. But going overseas, it took us 30 days to get to Naples, Italy.
Well, what was it like to be finally going overseas? You had tried and tried and tried.
Everybody was just thrilled to death. We had been issued Canadian battle dress uniforms in New York, and we had to buy our dress uniforms. And being summer, Well, we did have a jacket, khaki jacket, but most of the time you just went in the shirts. You had to wear a tie all the time. We we got to the port of embarkation that morning and got out of the trucks, and there were just trucks unloading everywhere with American troops. And we looked kind of funny, 90 of us with English battle dress jackets on. So the Canadians and Kiwis and Australians and all had the same battle dress, and sometimes a little different shade of brown or green or dark green. But anyway, I was surprised. They had a band there, and they were all marching down to this pavilion and getting on the ships. And I was surprised and looking around at our groups, because I'd been in military for school for a few months, and I'd been in the marching band in high school for 4 years, so I pretty well knew how to do close order drill. But I was surprised and pretty proud. We was marching along with these American soldiers and keeping our own. And we got down to the ship. We had an old gentleman in New York that was in second in command. He'd been in field service in World War I. I think his name was Mr. Wilson, if I remember right. But anyway, he was on one, not in uniform, out of the tens of thousands of troops there. He had an old briefcase and an old felt hat on, and he had come down with all our records to get us through. We had to have passports to get us through and on our way. So as we went down to get on our Liberty ship, we marched along with the Americans, and we got down there, and the band was playing all kinds of marches, and we started up the gangplank, and old man we call him Old Man Wilson. He was probably in his mid-50s.
He was a young fella.
Yeah,
now you'd call him
yeah,
young.
the only civilian around, and he shook our hands and told each one of us, he said, I'll be here to greet you when you come back. So that kind of put a little tear in your eye. And so about halfway up the gangplank, and they had given us American equipment, canteens, mess equipment, gas mask, helmets, and they told us not to strap under our chin, not to strap the helmet on, because if you fell into the water, it'd break your neck. So we had to leave it dangling. And going up the gangplank, my helmet kind of got down to my eyes. I had both arms full, and the band all of a sudden quit playing a march, and it played We'll Meet Again, Don't Know Where, Don't Know When. It was a British song. Why they played a British song, I don't know, I guess for us. And I kind of looked behind me and trying to keep my helmet on at the guy, and he had tears in his eyes, and I had tears in my eyes, and the guy in front of me, he turned around and looked at me, and he had tears in his eyes. So we'd always remembered that. But Mr. Wilson, in making that promise, he said, I'll be here when you come back. Later in my stories, I've got something about him again.
So you went from Virginia to, you said Naples?
Yes.
Naples, Italy?
In a 9-knot convoy, 30 days at sea.
We'll talk about landing in Italy and your first impressions of Europe. And
Well, on our ship going over, we had a submarine attack right before we got to the Baltic. I mean, not the Baltic, but the Mediterranean. And we just gone to bed at 10 o'clock when the alarm went off and the lights came back on. And my group of guys that I was with at the time, or 3 of us, we had bought out all the Coke in the commissary. We had a case of Coke, and I was custodian of it. And we were in the forward hold with 300 Puerto Ricans, and everybody was trying to find their life jackets, because we've been playing musical chairs with life jackets. I'd maybe leave one down, somebody'd pick it up. You didn't have one. That night I was lucky enough to have one in my bunk. And anyway, we was just all sitting there, told us to be prepared to abandon the ship. So we was all sitting there with whatever gear we thought we had to take with us. And so I started giving away these Cokes to all these Puerto Ricans around me. And so a couple of days later, after everything was said and done, one of my buddies said, how about one of those Cokes? Then I wasn't very popular with my 2 friends from then on. But I guess the most beautiful sight was going through the straits of but I guess the Straits of Sicily, between Sicily and the Boot. And we went through one Sunday afternoon, and that was several hundred miles below Naples. And finally, the next day, which was on a Monday, we landed in Naples, and we pulled up to the dock, and we disembarked with onto a side of a ship that had been sunk and was laying on its side, and that's what we got on to when we got off of our ship and went on to shore. And Naples had a big harbor, and the city kind of built around it. And way out was the Isle of Capri, and it says it's in their bay, but it's so far out you can barely see it. At that time, that was used for a rest area, convalescent soldiers who were getting out of the hospital and it weren't quite fit to go back to general services again, would be put out there. I was never fortunate enough to ever get out there. But we stayed 1 week in Naples, and we were at the far end of the city, inland from the bay, on the road called Via Roma. Our camp was right, the main street of Naples kind of took a little dip and then went up, and Dad ended right into our camp, and the street running north and south was Via Roma, which was the way to Rome. And we spent a week there, daytime, and then 1 or 2 nights getting acquainted with our ambulance. Ambulance was a American Dodge ambulance. Very sufficient. To me, it was the best built and best vehicle in the war. Because everybody else would tell you it was the Jeep, but it was had the most powerful engine. Later, I'll tell you about how we used it one time. But anyway, it had 4-wheel drive, and not any of the English equipment had 4-wheel drive, and that was I don't know how you got by in a place like Italy without that 4-wheel drive. And we learned how to maintain it. We had to grease it by hand once a month. We learned all about maintaining the ambulance, and then we learned, of course, about driving. Believe it or not, we had 5 guys in the unit that never driven an automobile. So we had to teach them how to drive. And then we had a lot of training on night driving, because at the front, the most light that you had on your ambulance was a slit light, and all it was good for, if somebody's coming down the road, they could see you. You couldn't see anything, well, except their slit light. But on the front, you couldn't even use those. So we practiced a guy getting out with a cigarette and putting it in his hand so it would not be visible but to anyone but to someone right behind him. And you would drive behind that fellow walking. And that was to be used in very severe cases. I never used it. The times I had to drive at night, one thing about it, we'd take the windshield down, and it pretty cold sometimes, but it made you see better. Near the front, a lot of times they would throw light on these big spotlights up to the clouds, and light would bounce off of them and would give us a little bit of light. But I don't know, I had developed what I call cat eyes. I could see very well. It's funny now, I'm legally blind, but at that time I could probably see better at night than any other fellow in the outfit.
Mm-hmm. Well, did teaching the 5 how to drive go without incident, or did you run into any trouble teaching them?
Oh, no, we had one guy that was in our group. We kind of broke up in groups to learn for that 1 week, and we took it ourselves to teach him how to drive. And he jumped the car or ambulance quite a bit, but they finally, I'm surprised that because I had driven 2-ton gravel trucks and everything else, and my granddad's pickup, and we pulled a trailer with cows and horses, and I had plenty of training, and to not even know, and I even drove a trailer truck. But to come in there without ever driving an automobile. I don't know how they did it, but they evidently they all learned enough to get by.
So you had, was there room for, how many men could you put in the back as far as stretchers?
You could put 4 stretchers, 2 on the floor and 2 hanging. At Dodge Ambulance was a wonderful place. That was a wonderful place to sleep at night. I'll tell you. I slept in tents a lot of times, and I'll tell you that that ambulance was a lot warmer.
I bet, yeah. Out of the elements.
Oh yes, yes. We were very fortunate there.
So I'm interested, as you interacted with did you have any interaction with the Italian people while you were there in town?
No, not very much. I went on 2 mercy trips while I was there. One of them wasn't really a trip. We were driving down the road. We were stationed up in the mountains, 2 of us in the ambulance, and we were driving. We had been snowed in for about 10 days. We finally got out and had brought some guys down to the hospital. We was with a Polish artillery unit, and they had gone back into rest area, which had been a little village that in peacetime probably was a ski resort. And we were going back that afternoon, trying to get back before dark. Didn't want to drive in the mountains any more than we had to in the dark. But anyway, that truck in front of us, an English truck, had swerved over and hit 2 Italian pedestrians that were walking up the road, and knocked them over in the ditch, and just went on. I mean, they purposely hit these Italians. The British and the Italians did not like each other because they had been fighting each other in the desert for years. And so we stopped, and one of the fellows was okay, but the other one found out later he had a broken shoulder. And we picked him up and put him on a stretcher and put him in the ambulance. And they couldn't speak English. We couldn't speak Italian very well, and we finally got it out of this other guy. We were going to take him to the next town to the civilian hospital, and he let us know that they wanted to stop. Their house was right on the road, and a lot of families lived together. And the grandmother and grandfather was always in the house. Mm-hmm. We stopped there, and when we got through, that ambulance was dragging. We had so many people in the back of that ambulance standing that we could barely close the door. Every relative that was in that house wanted to go to the hospital with him. So we took him to the hospital and found out they had a broken shoulder. Then we decided we had to be on our way. And of course, they were also, I mean, they were speaking in Italian and we were speaking in English, but they were so grateful to us for helping them. And so finally we went on, and we did get back before dark. But another time later, when we were stationed down in the valley, and I was at headquarters, and one of the guys told me, he said it was getting to be spring and it was a little more light. He said, after supper tonight, I got to make a run for a civilian to the hospital, and I want you to go along as a stretcher bearer. And I said, okay. And he got another guy, and we went into this cul-de-sac off the highway that and it seemed like it rained or snowed all the time. And anytime you got off a hard surface road, you were up to your fenders in mud. And we got into this cul-de-sac with this mud road, and we got to a point we couldn't go any further, even in four-wheel drive. So we said, well, we're going to have to go by foot from here on. So he had told me to bring my rubber boots, thank God. And as we got out, and I went around to get the stretcher out of the back of the ambulance, and I stepped out of one of my boots. And I was standing on one side there with mud about 2 feet deep. I finally worked myself over without falling and got back in that boot. And the house was up on a higher plane, and so it had a yard, and it was full of Italians. And we got up to the house, and what it was, we were taking a pregnant woman, and I mean she was due any time, to the hospital. And of course there's 3 of us, and they met us the minute we came out of the mud. They were standing there with glasses of wine, and they had bottles, not bottles, but clasps of wine, you know, and they were giving us wine, and it tasted pretty good, warmed us up. And by the time we got that woman on a stretcher and leaving, I couldn't have stood up if the mud hadn't held me up. And we had to carry that very pregnant woman back in the mud to the ambulance, and then back out of there.
Well, you mentioned something there I want to ask about. What did you think of the Brits, and what was the relationship with the British like?
Well, I had two very close friends. One was a British sergeant that I met in Naples, and another was a enlisted man in Germany at Belsen. I got very attached to both of them, and but a lot of times we had about 30, 35 drivers or ambulances, and probably extra 5 or 6 men, extra drivers. So we had about 40 drivers to about 35 ambulances in each platoon, and we had about 5 Brits that were attached to the platoon. Now, my first platoon in Italy, there was only one Englishman that I had any trouble with, and he was the mechanic. And he had a little power over us, because he had to inspect our ambulance, and we had to make good whatever he wanted us to. We didn't get along with him very well, but the others we got along with very well. And then I met a couple of English fellows one time when we were back in relief, back in well, a lot of times you would be on the front, and then you would move back several miles behind the front in secondary position, and met a couple of RAF fellows who were spotters, more or less. I mean, they took care of these spotter flags and things like that would say to the planes, it would show them that they were 1 mile from the front or 2 miles from the front or something like that. And we got very well acquainted with a couple of those fellows. when I went into Germany with a new unit, we had I had a very close relationship with the cook, because I used to wake him up a lot of times in the morning when I came off of guard duty. But the rest of the ones that were attached to us in Germany weren't very friendly. I don't know why. They just, as a rule, and they would talk to us and tell us how they didn't like the Americans, but we were the exception, you know. But they said, oh, they drank too much and they bragged too much and all this and that. The Italians and the British didn't get along very well. The Italians and Americans got along real well. I got to Germany, I was very surprised how friendly the German people were to us. And I made some friends with some of the Germans.
Well, talk about when you moved out, when you were left camp. You broke camp there in Naples and moved out from there.
Well, after a week, we broke camp. We were put into a flatbed truck, and it had a Napoleon on the front of it, went on top of the cab, and it was kind of irritating because we couldn't see in front of us like that with that up there. In other words, we couldn't stand up behind the cab and look. So we was going up the Via Roma, the road to Rome, and about 10 or 15 miles outside of Naples, there was an accident, and we were told, he said, okay, fellows, you're going to see your first casualties of war now, so be prepared. And we drove by, and there were 3 bodies laid outside the road with blankets on top of them. And they said, we had the English were driving us. There was 3 of them. There was a driver, a spare driver, and a mechanic. They all sat in the cab. And then we had some veterans with us that were going as far as Rome, and they were the ones that were telling us what everything was. And we had one of our guys had married an Italian girl, and they were just riding from Naples with us to Rome. She had her bicycle in the back. And we were told at that point, the veterans were saying, half the casualties in the war are friendly fire or accidents. And I really came to know that was true. There was a lot of accidents, and there was a lot of friendly fire that, in fact, I got involved in some of it. And another saying, when we were on the ship, they said, well, I guess it was after we got off the ship, that we were with some of the British we had a club in the camp there, and it was a transit camp, and meant guys going to and from the front, maybe from the hospital. They'd go in this transit camp and wait till they could get a ride back to their unit. And they said, you're going to find that when you touch your foot overseas, that patriotism is going to be left behind, and you're going to you're going to step into self-preservation. And that was very true. Once you got overseas, your thoughts were, take care of yourself, get through this. And I think when the guys that won the Congressional Medal of Honor and all that, and the Silver Star and all that, and I've read this and I believe it, that it was just adrenaline running, that whenever the opportunity or the problem came about, you just automatically went into doing whatever was necessary to do. And it wasn't so much an act of bravery, even though it, at the time, even though it was just a reaction. So really, everybody was trying to, no one was trying to get killed, in other words.
Yeah. So they're transporting you guys to, where was the front at that?
At that time, the front was north of Florence. They transported us. We went through Mount Casino. We could see the monastery, or what was left of it, and it was still smoking. And it had taken more bombs than any than any target had in the whole war. And that had, the American and British troops had been held up there by the Germans for months. And then after we got through there, we went over to the took a road over to the seacoast and saw where the battle.
Ooh, hold on, just stop. Quick. Ooh, my battery died. All right, Mr. Waters, you were taking us to the front.
Yeah, as we left Casino, well, we went to Angel out on the ocean front, and we could still see pieces of broken artillery. It looked like, of course, the battle had taken place about 5-6 months before, or had ended 5-6 months before, but still had pieces of cannons and trucks and all still laying around. Looked like it might have been a Civil War battlefield.
Mm.
Then when we got into Rome, we got a pretty good tour of Rome, because we had to take this driver and his wife to her family, and it was a pretty good trip to Rome to drop them off, and then we went back to a cafe to have lunch. It was kind of a sidewalk cafe. Had an awning in front. We were sitting inside the cafe, and I dug down under the awning and looked across the street, and there was the Coliseum. We were right. There was a road that kind of semicircles around the Coliseum, and we were on the restaurant on that road. Some 30 years later, I went back to Rome, and with a tour, and my wife and myself were over at the Colosseum, and I looked to the west, and it kind of dipped down, and then it went up to the road, and there was the restaurant that I had eaten at there, and it was still it was still there. But anyway, we left Rome, and we had been raining, but not on us. We were missing the showers, and we got up in the hills beyond Rome that afternoon and had a rest stop, and we got out and looked back on Rome, and had been some rain behind us, and there was a rainbow, the most beautiful rainbow I've ever seen, and the end of it was over St. Peter's Cathedral. And we looked back, at first we were looking back at Rome, and of course it was late afternoon, and it looked like they had a fire in Rome, and we were all looking at it, so it looked like there's a fire in the west part of Rome. And what it was a sun on St. Peter's Cathedral. And it was St. Peter's Cathedral that was throwing the reflection at.
Oh, wow. Beautiful.
It was a beautiful sight. And that old tarpaulin that was in our way, where we were standing there, the grass was damp. It had rain, and I don't know how we were missing the showers, but we were missing them. And anyway, we got back in the truck and riding and seeing the scenery, and laying down and resting and all, and then about I don't know, it was a little bit after dark, it started raining, and then I appreciated the tarpaulin at that time. I realized why we had that tarpaulin. And they pulled that tarpaulin over us, and we had our luggage in the forward part of the truck, and we were standing or sitting down and all in the rear end of the truck. And we pulled that tarpaulin over us, and then, I don't know, it must have been about 9 o'clock, we stopped, pouring down rain, and wanted to know if any of us had to go relieve ourselves. So we all got out in the rain, and man, to get back up under that tarpaulin was nice. And then I found me I got up on top of some of the luggage and found me a place, and the tarpaulin was about 12 inches above my nose. Found me a nice clean spot without any mud. Everybody's shoes were muddy, trying to keep away from the mud. And I could hear that rain hitting that tarpaulin on top of me, and it kind of had a cozy feeling, and it was cool. And then about 10 o'clock or so, our truck stopped. And then I realized why they had a mechanic with them, and they were out in the rain working on that truck. I don't know when they fixed it, because I woke up the next morning and dug myself out of the back of under the tarpaulin, and we were at an abandoned factory, and it was just south of Florence, and there was pavement everywhere. We got out and it was wet, and the air was cool, and of course it wasn't raining anymore, and it was, and the drivers had made some tea for us, and we had some type of bread or cake or something that we ate with our tea. And really, under the circumstances, is probably the best breakfast I ever had. From there, we went into Florence, and there's kind of a circle on the south side of the river, Arno River, and it goes up into a little to a place on top of the hill there, and had a big statue of David up there. And we came in, just how we came into Rome was right at the top of that circle. And the circle down had a lot of nice villas there, and one of those villas, they pointed it out to us, had been taken over by the field service, and it was a convalescent villa for, and I got to stay in it a few days later in my stay in Rome and my stay in Italy. Anyway, we went down, and the Germans had blown all the bridges except one, and that was the famous covered bridge. Of course, it didn't take transportation so much as it was kind of a commercial bridge. It sold souvenirs and stuff like that. It was covered. But we crossed a army constructed bridge to the other side of the Arno River, and then went outside of Rome to the northeast, and we ran into our stop for lunch, and a place that was the headquarters for one of the two ambulance companies. I don't remember which one, but anyway, it was a villa inside of a compound. I mean, they had a rock wall, and it was in squares. Had the wall on the north side, the east side, the west side, the south side, and the villa was right in the middle, and all the rest of it was a rose garden. Mm. And you had four ways into the into the villa, which did not look like an Italian village. It was a single-story, nice house. But we had lunch there, and it was the creepiest feeling because there was wire strung on each side of the pass, four pass coming in, with the little stickers on them that meant mines. So that rose garden had not been demined. You could not step off of the path. And it was kind of eerie feeling to eat lunch knowing all these explosives were all in the ground around you.
Mm-hmm. You could tell you were getting closer to the war.
Yes, yes. And that night we got in, at that point we separated into different units, depending on, we each, that had to be 485 headquarters. We had two companies in Italy, 4 platoons each, 485 and 567. And 485 was the company I was in. We we were taken to the platoon headquarters that night, and then we stayed there a day, kind of resting up, and then the second day we were carried to the front, and we had a station on top of Mount Monte Grande, which was the tallest mountain in the chain north of Florence.
Can you talk about once you got to the front, what your impressions or what stands out to you?
Well, we didn't have any. We certainly didn't have any paved roads. We had to go. We had to go up this canyon. The river was at the bottom of a canyon, and there was a road on one side on the east side, and it just gradually went up until finally 5 or 6 miles or more you were at the top of the canyon, and then there was a little village over on the other side, but to get to that village you had to go on a bridge, and the bridge had been blown up. And so then there had been a bridge put in by the Americans called a Bailey Bridge, and it was nothing on top, and all the strength of the bridge was underneath the bridge, and it was kind of leery going. I went to the bridge in Colorado. I can't think of the name of it now.
The Royal Gorge?
Royal Gorge.
Yeah.
And when I went to the Royal Gorge, it reminded me of this canyon and bridge. It was about the same width and everything. But it had no upper structure on it, and which made you feel like a little uneasy when you went across, especially when you could feel it giving. And so anyway, we crossed over there to a little village, and it was right at the foot of a mountain. And then we went 9 miles up this mountain, Mount Grande, and it was unpaved, did not have any sides on the road. In other words, if you could go right off the road down about 5,000 feet or more. We got nearly to the top, and we had a traffic problem. We were in a Jeep. We had a traffic problem. There had been some shelling on the road by the Germans. It was under German occupation. The road was for the whole 9 miles, and their German artillery had hit a truck for the 78th English Division, and so I saw my first war dead at that time. And as we finally passed it, it was still smoking, and then some bodies were laying out to the side. And we kind of had a, well, I can't think of the name of it now, but anyway, we had a surgical unit there at the top of the mountain. It was about 2 miles from the front, but about 5 miles by road. And we could see the crest of Monte Grande about 200 feet higher than what we were, about 2 miles as a crow flies from us. And where this surgical unit was under tents, next to that was about 3 English 25-pounder cannons that were dug in. Kind of strange to me that the artillery was right next to the surgical unit. And then we had about half a dozen ambulances up there. And what they would do is they would bring them from the bottom of the crest at Monte Grande. We had a aid station, and the aid station then would send them down to the surgical facility, and then we would move them from there down to the bottom of the mountain, and then they would be taken over there by the English and would be taken. And there was little small, about halfway down the canyon, there was an indention in the side of the canyon, and there was a little small hospital there. So that was the first place where you could see female nurses. But the the road down to Castle del Rio was the village at the bottom. The Germans would open up their artillery on the road every afternoon. And so we drove it, as a rule, we drove it twice a day, once at night and once in the daytime.
So you get assigned your ambulance and you're working?
Yeah, well, we first got up there. These guys had been there for several weeks and were all worn out. Mm-hmm. Eyes were bloodshot and everything else, so we gradually took over from them. We first set up a tent with 3 of us in it, and I think we slept in there maybe one night, and we got assigned ambulances. Of course, we slept in our ambulances from there on. I remember I went down there. First trip I took down, I had 4 bad patients. One of them was unconscious. We didn't know whether he was alive or not. And you're assigned an orderly also, a British orderly. He was always checking on him to see if he was alive. And they started shelling us. And of course, there were potholes all in the road. Your top speed was about 9 miles an hour. And I had the dilemma, do I go fast and have a very rough ride, or to get out of the shelling, or do I just stay in the shelling and try to get as comfortable ride as possible? And I know I had one of the fellows in the back there said, Yank, says, he says, I'm hurting like hell, but he said, if you can go faster, I can take it. And you do what you think necessary to get us out of this. And another guy said, I'm with him. And then there was a third guy that started hollering every time we hit a bump. He'd holler and he'd cuss me out, and so anyway, I was in between. So I got out there as quick as I could, and hitting all these potholes and all. I could see the shells hitting below as we were going down. I could see this out the corner of my eyes. I could see the mountainside and to my left, and I could see when the shell would hit and explode into the side of the mountain. And so anyway, I got them down to the bottom, and when we were unloading, and this guy that was complaining and cussing me out and everything, when they brought him by, he just gave me a dirty look. I don't know. I sat down on the curb, and it was my first experience, and I sat down on the curb and kind of had my head down in my hands, I guess, and my orderly came by and sat down beside me and put his arm around me.
It was a rough first trip.
Yeah, it was. It was.
So there's an open space between you and there's two of you in the cab, I guess.
Yeah.
And there's an open space
Well,
between the back.
they come right up to the back of our seats.
So they're right there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. In fact, Arlie, the fellow that we didn't know whether he was alive or not, Arlie was putting some gauze under his nose all the time to
keep him away,
to see if he was alive.
So the orderly was assigned to your ambulance?
Huh?
The orderly was assigned to your
Yeah.
ambulance?
One night we made a trip down, and of course at night you had no lights, and it was cold. There was snow on the ground and at the top of the mountain, and my grandmother had knitted me a hood, so I had that hood on, and it really came in handy. And so we had a pretty rough drive down because you had no railings on the road whatsoever. I mean, if you go over the side, you got at least 5,000 foot drop. So I was just fortunate, and then also they were throwing some light up to hit the clouds, and that up at top now, we got about halfway down, we didn't have any help at all. So after making one of those trips at night, first time I made it, we got back, I guess we started about 2 o'clock in the morning, so I guess we got back, we did at least after 4 o'clock when I got back in bed. And then about 8 o'clock the next morning, I heard a bang on the back of my ambulance. I said, oh goodness, what in the world is this? And I opened it up and stuck my head out, and here's my little orderly standing there with some oatmeal and tea. I wanted to kill him.
So you're operating, now give me an idea of time frame. This is around what time? This is,
This was in November.
November
Mhm.
44.
44.
Yeah, yeah.
And I know when when we left that, when we finally pulled out, we started pulling out one ambulance at a time. And I was under the weather, and so another guy was driving me out, or driving us out. And we hit a paved road, and I told him to stop. And he stopped, and I got out, and I kneeled down in the middle of the road and kissed it. And I got back in, and he said, "What in the world was that?" And I said, "I promised myself if I ever saw a paved road again, I was going to kiss it." Because we were working with mud up to our hubcaps
Yeah.
in some cases.
In bomb craters and all sorts of
Oh,
things.
yes.
So y'all pulled out. How long were you in that position before you pulled out?
Oh, about 10 days.
Okay.
I went from there. I was sick, and I went from there to the hospital and our convalescent home in villa in
It was in Florence. wasn't it?
Florence.
Uh-huh.
And I was in the hospital a week, and then came back out, and then I immediately was posted with the Polish, and it was and then it was almost Christmas time, and we went to a villa on top of this little mountain on the backside of Perdapio, Italy, and that's where Mussolini was born, in that little village.
Mhm.
But then it got spring, and I was I had my ambulance all fixed, all my clothing and everything, ready to leave the next morning for a post. And this was in last part of March, I guess, first part of April. And after dinner that night, somebody came in the front door, and it was chilly out there, and they were all bundled up and all, and they took our commanding officer into a room off to the side, and they were in there about 30 minutes, and then they came out. And I was just about ready to go in my ambulance to go to sleep, because I was leaving early the next morning. And our lieutenant said, "Well, we've got a problem here." He said, "They want 10 volunteers to go with Company 567. And all we can say is that you'll be leaving Italy. And we need 10 volunteers." There was 11 people there. 11 people volunteered. Said, "Okay," we got down, and we were just taken by seniority. And so they turned to me and a friend of mine that came over seas together, and they said, "You two are tied for the 10th place." And there was a deck of cards on the table, and our lieutenant said, "Why don't y'all draw cards, see who goes?" Man goes. I turned to Trey. The other guy turned to Deuce. So I got to leave Italy, and we went out on the other side of just outside of Leghorn, and we left that night, and we joined the 567 down the other side of the mountain, and we went to our campground where we stayed a week or 10 days, something like that, just outside of Leghorn. And then we went to, from Leghorn, they took us by LST over to France. Can't think of the name of the port, but anyway, we were taken to France, and then we outside the port there we stayed a day or so, and then we started our trip up to France, the Rhone Valley. And it was getting spring, and it was some beautiful flowers in the valley, and we could see the snow-capped mountains off to our right over in Switzerland and southern part of France. It took us 6 days, I think it was, to get to Belgium. And then we went into a little town of Beringen, Belgium, and then we stayed there for a few days, and then we went from there to southern Holland. We were there a few days. We had 4 platoons of about 35 animals each. They all, three of the platoons got stationed, got projects to go on, and we were sitting there, and all of a sudden they said that we were going into Germany. We were going to take the 9th General Hospital into Germany. And that night we were, that day, we went down to southeastern part of Holland, and they spent the night, and the next morning we took off with the 9th General Hospital. And unknown to us, we were going to Belsen concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen. And it took us 2 days of wandering around northern part of the northwest part of Germany. And why it took us so long to go such a short period, I mean, it's such a short trip, I don't know. We were less than 200 miles. And
was that area fairly secure?
Yeah, we had pockets of resistance all along, and we had to dodge them. It was toward the end of the war. At that time, it was in the latter part of April. Took us two days to get to Belsen. And we did not, I don't think we knew we were going to a concentration camp. In fact, I'm pretty sure we did not know. All we knew was we was taking the English hospital into some destination in northern Germany. And thought it was just moving a hospital. And the afternoon that we arrived at Belsen, we there's a city named Sale, Germany, that's 20 miles due south of Belsen. Belsen is a town. Berger, I think, is also a town. But we were in convoy, and all of a sudden the convoy slowed down, and then I was probably in the first half of the convoy, and as we came up to the end of the forest that we were in, we'd been in this forest for about 20 miles, and we looked over to our left, and there was a camp over there, and the gates were open on the camp, and then there was about half a dozen or so men in striped uniforms, just wandering around. I mean, it was like they were in a daze. And I don't know how I don't remember that we knew much about concentration camps and all or not, but the gates were open and they were free to do what they wanted to do, and they just seemed like they were wandering around like zombies. And then we went on past the camp, and about a mile and a half north of the camp was a SSS barracks. It had been they had been a training facility there since about middle 30s, I guess. And there were dormitories built, 2 rows of them. In the middle there were some wooden buildings, 1-story buildings. The dormitories were about 3-4 stories high. They were the SS barracks is what they were. And I don't know whether it was built for a cavalry post or not, but it looked like that these little wooden part stone 1-story huts that were in the middle between them might have been place for horses. It might have been a cavalry, built as a cavalry post. I wasn't sure. But we went on through the SS we turned back toward the west and went outside the camp into the forest there, and found us a place to build our camp. Mm-hmm. And then we spent the night, and then all but one or two ambulances went back to pick up the remaining half of the Ninth General Hospital. We went back in one day and returned in one day. And while we were gone, they'd had a bombing from a German plane, and then we only had one casualty. And then we had another casualty, a guy that had died of the typhus. So we all ran down and got our booster shots. The British had left 250 engineers there, our engineering company. And the camp had been without food and water for a couple of weeks. They said from the time it was liberated until the time we got there, 10 days to 2 weeks, they had lost 60,000 people. And we got there was 40 to 50,000 left in the camp. And it had started in 1939 as a prisoner of war camp for the Russian prisoners. And then they had added the concentration camp onto it. It was probably one of the smallest concentration camps that they had. Covered less than 50 acres.
Can you talk about when you first went in the camp and just what you remember?
Yeah, we went in the first day we went into the camp. I went in as a stretcher bearer. And the English had all kinds of protective gear on. We didn't. They just spray us. So we all were gray-headed there for a couple of months, spraying us. Spray us down the back of our neck and all. And we went in and there was a medical team, and the doctors would, or a doctor would say which patient was too far gone, and we skipped those, and we were in the woman's section, and the doctor had a couple of orderly with him, and they would strip off the clothing of the person and then wrap them in a blanket and put them on the stretcher, and we'd carry them out, and we would help them get the women on the stretcher. And there was one woman just fighting us like everything. She thought that we were taking her to the crematorium, which they did. They took, sometimes when they went in to get the bodies, and there were some that were not quite dead yet, they would pick them up and take them to the crematorium also, evidently. And so anyway, and the camp, it was dead bodies around. They had some Germans in a flatbed truck going around picking up bodies. We would pick up women. We would pick up a woman, and beside her was a corpse. But then you had to watch where you walked because there was filth everywhere. The engineers had got them some water by detouring the creek below the camp into the camp. They had latrines built by just digging a trench, putting boards over it and drilling holes in the thing, and it was all out in the open. And women would just go up and squat on the top of the hole. And there was an open grave on the north side that they were putting about 1,000 to 2,000 bodies in, and we had to drive right by it going out, and they had Germans down in the bottom of the pit stacking bodies. And I remember one time a lot of times people's eyes would be open and it looked like that they were staring at you. I don't know how many of those graves that they had. I think some of them might have even been up to 4,000 in a grave. I got by. I got by pretty well. I think I had been pretty weak when I first got to Italy, and I had to really build up my tolerance, if that's what you want to call it. And I was kind of I had said, well, if I'm going to do the job, I'm going to have to get I guess you might say, indifference. And later I thought that maybe I wasn't or maybe I don't know how to say it, but maybe I was too hard. Didn't have the sympathy and all that I should have had. But after the war, it really didn't bother me. It bothered some of the guys pretty bad. Some of them had to go home. Afterwards, I stayed and went to India after the war in Europe was over with. Years later, I mean, I never lost any sleep. I never had any nightmares about it. And one Sunday afternoon, I went to see a movie with my wife called Sophie's Choice. And it was about a Polish woman who was sent to the camp. I know it wasn't Belsen, but it looked, on the screen, it looked a lot like Belsen. But it had some features that Belsen didn't have. And she had to make up her mind. The SS officer told her that she had a boy and a girl with her, and she had to choose between one of them. The other was going to be sent to the gas chamber. And she wouldn't make her choice, and he said, well, we're going to take both of the children then. So she finally chose to save the boy. And anyway, after the movie, it was a Sunday afternoon, and we got out and got in the car. And I don't think I'd ever talked to my wife about Belsen. I talked a lot about the war, but because I traveled a lot and saw a lot of things, but I didn't talk too much about Belsen. And I broke down. And my wife didn't know what in the world was going on. And I think that's the first time that I had really had the compassion and I felt bad that I didn't have more compassion when I was in Belsen.
You were there for several days working as a stretcher?
Yes, I didn't do a lot of work in the camp after that. I drove an ambulance one day, stretcher a couple of days. We weren't in the camp for about 10 days. It took about 10 days for us to clear it out. The war ended while we were in the midst of our work. And we stayed on. The war ended about May the 6th or 7th. And I think it was May the 12th or 21st. that the camp burned, I know there wasn't very many. A lot of guys, after the war was over with, even before we had quite a few spare drivers. So they started going on leave and some of them preparing to go home. We got down to barely having enough drivers to drive our ambulances back out of Germany, but like I say, I'm not too sure of. I know we cleared the camp out in about 2 weeks or a little less. Got most of them out in a week. When we got there were 600 a day dying in the camp, and at the end there, it was down to 100 a day. And we would take them up to one of these little huts I was telling you about that ran between the barracks. Mm-hmm. And they would take them in there and strip their clothes off of them and de-lice them and cut their hair and get the lice out of their hair and cut their hair and scrub them real good and put new clothing on them, and then they would move them into the hospital section. And there at the last, we had German nurses that were doing the first cleanup on the patients, and then they were moving them into the dormitories, which had SS dormitories had been turned into hospitals. And the operation, I guess, had been over quite several days. And I was in the camp, and there probably wasn't a half a dozen people in the camp. I don't know. They were going here and there and everywhere. A lot of them were going to Paris on leave. And I saw this black smoke going up into the sky. And I asked somebody, I said, what in the world is going on? And somebody said, they're burning the camp, or what's left of it. So I jumped in the ambulance and drove down there, and man, that was the blackest smoke I'd ever seen. And I know I wrote in my account of it that it looked like the fires of hell. And I guess it was probably within a week that we left and took our ambulances back into Holland. The minute we got back to Holland, I left the unit and with several other guys, and we went to a leave in Paris. And then when I got back from leave in Paris, we stayed a short time in Belgium, and then they shipped us to England. And we were in England about 10 days, I guess, and then I guess we had about, in 5, 6, 7, we had about 250 personnel, and 75 of us shipped to India, and then about 75 from Italy shipped to India. So we ended up getting together in India about 150 drivers. And of course, before we ever even got our ambulances there, the war ended. And we messed around a month or so and finally got transportation, and they flew us back to England. And by way of Israel, which was not Israel at the time, but Palestine. Even spent one night in Iraq. Spent 4 days in Pakistan, which was not Pakistan at the time. Had lunch in Libya, and they flew us back on converted bombers. And they had taken us out to India, through the Mediterranean, the canal. I mean trying to think of the
Suez.
We had to go through the locks of the Suez Canal and into the Red Sea and then the Indian Ocean, and went out to Bombay. And they went down in the southern part of India, and then the war ended, and I went on leave to Calcutta, and then we came back and then started flying home. And we got to England. We stayed 30 days in Wales waiting for a ship, and we finally shipped home on the Queen Elizabeth. And I think we were 4 days, something like that, 4 days into Halifax. They put us on a train. Took a couple of days to get everybody off there, and we were the last ones off. Put us on a train one evening late, and we rode from there to Montreal to Quebec. From Quebec to Montreal is 150 miles, and it took us. It started snowing and a blizzard, and it took us from 8 o'clock in the morning till 3 or 4 o'clock the next morning to get into Montreal. We got into Montreal. There was a private train waiting to take us to New York. And, the gentleman who said that I'll be there to meet you, as our train pulled in, and it was 2 o'clock in the morning when the train pulled in. And smoke was coming up, and you could hardly see so much smoke up there. And I looked over there. There was that gentleman.
There's Mr. Wilson.
As we got off our train, they told us, as quick as possible, get on the other train. It's a special train waiting to pull out. We're going to pull out and y'all get on. And he was standing at the bottom, shook every one of us our hands and said, "Welcome home."
That's great. Well, going ahead a bit, of course, we talked before we started recording. You went back for the 60th anniversary of the liberation of the camp.
Yes.
Can you talk just a little bit about what that meant to you to be there for that?
I didn't know how I was going to feel, but with my family and my wife and all, I held up pretty well. And I know that there were 72 of us that were there, and to go back, there was only 2 of us that were physically able to go back at that time. And one was he was 80 years old, and I guess I was 80. He was a physician in New York City and couldn't leave his practice at 80. And so I went by myself to the reunion and took my family with me. And I know I was standing in the entrance that they now have for the camp. I was standing right there in the middle of it, and I said, "Where is the main gate? Where was the main gate?" And one of the fellows with us says, "You're standing on what was the main gate." And it had grown up so much. I mean, there was an open field out there back 60 years before, and it was all timber out there then, and trees. They had carved it out of the corner of a forest, and then the forest had grown back. And I know my wife told me, I said, "This doesn't look like it." And my wife said, "Well, a lot of trees can grow in 60 years.
You talked about it being an emotional event. That emotional event you had with your wife, was this, I'm sure this was emotional as well.
Well, not as much as I thought it would be. Just the way it was carried out, we went inside and they had a special place for us to sit. The rest of the family didn't get to sit there, but my wife and my wife and I had special location. There were 4 speeches. I mean, the ceremony lasted a couple hours, and there was 4 speeches, and only one of them was in English, and one in German, and I don't know, there's different French, different people got up, but we all had printed we had printed programs that outlined their speeches.
Well, is there, I know we're getting up against the deadline. There's some other things that I should have asked you that we didn't get into.
Of course, I could talk for 2 days, but I don't know of which one would be of interest. I know I was a young man that had barely been outside the state of Texas before World War II, and then to go halfway around the world and back. And I often think more of it, really, about the travel that I did and the people I met and the scenes and all that I saw.
Well, I know Robert joins me. We want to thank you for your service overseas.
Well, I don't feel like I did that much, but I feel like I'm more. I know my son once said when the war in Europe was over with, which was right, I had come off of guard duty and I was sound asleep, and all of a sudden the roaring of guns and everything. In fact, the celebration, they shot out the top of our tent where we couldn't even say it anymore, and when it rained. But I know my son said, I woke up and said, "What in the world's going on?" And somebody said, "The war's over." And I said, "What war?" But it wasn't quite that easy.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Waters.